When I was a kid, it started off with belts, and then it went to like riding crops, horse riding crops. And then it went to like anything my dad could get his hand on. Your dad was directly under God, so everything he says you have to do. And my dad was a little wishy-washy sometimes. And so sometimes we would get in trouble for something, and the next time we wouldn't get in trouble for it. So very early on, when I was like 5 and 6, my dad would watch TV. So me and my brother would watch TV if we got permission from my mom. But then if my dad came home and saw us watching TV and he didn't approve of it, we would get beaten. So it was really ridiculous little things like that. I remember a lot of punishments we would get were extreme, but then we would go sit in this was before the boarding schools. We would go sit in the church, and the pastor would be preaching, better a pink bottom than a black heart. And it wasn't just like he said it the way I said it. He was screaming it, jumping on pulpits, and like saying, basically, if you don't beat your kid's evil. And so as much as people want to say not my church, if you really truly look at the IFB, from John R. Rice to Jack Hiles to Lester Roloff, he's a big one that started the TTI schools. So if you look at them and their teaching, it's hate. It's not discipline. It's straight up hate. Punishments were really off the wall in our household. As we got older, me and my brother would bicker and fight. And so my dad would make us hold hands or sleep together or hug and kiss for hours in front of him. If we spoke out of turn or like back talked, we would get the backhand to our mouth. His favorite one was hot sauce and baking soda, like spoonfuls of baking soda.
Oh, what?
Yeah. As a kid, I did not know that I could have died from that. And so as I got older, to me, I smile at these things because as an adult, I'm like, how would you as an adult think that's like normal? Like you're literally putting something that could kill a child in its mouth. But to them, it was, I guess, necessary. I don't know. My parents, when I was roughly 4, started working. They left the church, like just the church, and started working in boarding schools. And so it's a little different than the church, I guess. It's all a cult, but it's all separate, and it gets different for me than it does for like other people within the IFB.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the schools were run under IFB principles, though, even though they were separate, right?
Well, they are IFB.
Oh,
Agape
okay.
was its own church, but Circle of Hope and the school down in Florida, they went to churches outside of it. Some of the parishioners that went to the church did not know what was going on at Circle of Hope. And I'm sure if they did, they would have, at the time, they would have been appalled. Some of them, after we went public, did reach out to me saying, I thought something was fishy because of how extreme and torturous these homes get. And I'm not saying that other families within the IFB don't get like that, but it's a different breeding ground because it would be like a pastor keeping its parishioners in the church at all times and being able to do whatever he wants, rather than those families being able to go home and make their own choices. So within the schools, the kids had nowhere to go. And a lot of these men are on power trips and do really sadistic things. And so that's how it gets different.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a little bit because I'm sure there's people who are wondering or thinking to themselves, well, it just sounds like she had bad parents or her parents were sadistic. But what I want to underline here is the fact that it's the environment that breeds these perpetrators. And it's this doctrine that encourages these behaviors, or not even encourages, but demands these behaviors. So can you talk a little bit about, just from the IFB perspective specifically, before the boarding schools, what were some of the doctrines that were being promoted for this abuse of children?
So I was 4. So I don't remember that young. I went to like Sunday schools with my parents, and then eventually my dad and mom didn't like us going to Sunday school, so we would have to sit in big church. And then when we weren't quiet enough, we would get beaten for it at home. So I was basically 4 when we left that, and the doctrine wasn't really, it was being brainwashed into me that young, but I don't remember it as much as I remember what I was taught within the schools. And what was taught within the schools is the same doctrine. So at Circle of Hope, a majority of our school credit was learning how to be a wife. It was the book, if I remember correctly, was called How to Be His Helpmeet. And so you were taught how to have sex with your husband, how not to have sex with your husband, how to cook, how to clean, how to make your husband pleased, how to keep your husband pleased, all of these things. It was really when I became a teenager is when I remember it more, if that makes sense. It was
Yeah.
all like, oh, this doesn't seem okay. Because as a kid, I was just like, oh, happy Jesus, happy Noah's Ark, blah, 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 all that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because it seems like purity culture would be so extreme, or at least it seems that way based on the modesty standards. And I noticed from the documentary there's a lot of victim blaming. So if a woman is assaulted or a young girl is assaulted, she's blamed for it. It's her fault. And obviously that's not okay. But they're giving you this book of how to have sex. How young were you when you got this book? Do you remember?
I was 15. That was at Circle of Hope. But I know other schools that my mom like volunteered at gave it to their students younger. So at Circle of Hope, I was 15, but there were younger kids as well. So
Interesting. So you actually had, I mean, I don't want to call it sex education, but I guess it's better than nothing to understand how sex works. Did you get any sort of sex education aside from the book, or that was just your main resource?
that was our main resource. And it wasn't really like teaching you properly how to have sex. It was just teaching you, if your husband wants it this way, you give it to him this way.
Oh,
Yeah, it
oof.
doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you don't want to. It doesn't matter what you want. It only matters what he wants. And so, but absolutely no sex ed at all.
Knowing that, then it's still, you would be better off not having any sex ed
Yeah.
than getting that book, because at that point you're just breeding the perfect paradise for perpetrators, because they can just do whatever they want and you think that that's how it works. So, okay, that's not good. All right, so should we get into then the boarding schools specifically? I know you were at Agape. Is there anything that you want to talk about specifically going to that school first?
That's where my parents got more strict. So down in the first school in Florida, it was still IFB, but it was a little more liberal, and that's why my parents left that school. So when we got to Agape, it was a huge culture shock for me. And what I mean by that is out in Florida, I was allowed to wear boy shorts as long as they went below my knee, because I rode horses and it was more comfortable than wearing culottes. And so my dad allowed me to wear boy shorts as long as they went below my knee. And at that point, we were allowed to listen to Christian rock because the school there allowed it. And I was allowed to play Game Boy. I had Game Boys, so I was like allowed to play Mario and things like that. When we got to Agape, my dad took all of that stuff we had and threw it away.